Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. This is Christopher Aaron. It will be July 3rd by the time you see this. And I want to spend this week focusing on silver and the silver miners. We have not looked at silver in about a month on this channel, so I want to do a proper update on where we are. This is an absolutely make or break time for silver once again, and the roadmap ahead of us is going to be radically changing depending on what happens here throughout the course of the next month or so. So let's really take a look at this in the most clear way possible, which is to focus on the actual data. That is what we're doing here. I want to remind you to subscribe to this channel and hit the little bell icon so you will be notified when these updates come out. And we're talking about the silver market, this make or break time. So let's bring up the long-term chart. Just for reference, we are talking about silver from that all-time high peak in 2011 at the $50 mark, plus or minus, which was matched with the 1980 peak. So that was the second time this level has been challenged. And our thesis here, just to back up for one moment, is that the third time that silver challenges this $50 level should be the last time. And after that, it will, in most likely odds, break through this level. So really here, we're judging the bottoming process that's happening here for silver before that next attempt. And we're asking the question, is this next attempt getting ready to start now over the next couple of years? Or is it going to be later on in the decade or something like that? That is what we are attempting to address here with this type of technical work. And so the most important thing for you to focus on at this moment, as we've seen what was almost a collapse in the silver market going back from 2011 to 2015, a nice surge in the beginning of 2016, and now a bit of a lesser grinding downtrend here with some quite significant waves, but still embedded in this lesser downtrend. And we notice here the clarity. I just want to point you to the clarity in this blue primary downtrend that we are still in, with something like 5 hits on each side. And the hits on this upper resistance, this declining resistance zone here, are really getting quite congested. If you notice, there's been 1, 2, 3, 4, and this is really the 5th hit that we're seeing here in almost the last year on this declining resistance. And so just keep in mind what we're looking at here when we're studying the charts is we are studying where are the sellers showing up. And we're studying a confluence of all the sellers. It's not to negate the investment sellers. It's not to negate the mining sellers. It's not to negate the manipulation sellers. It's not to negate the hedging sellers. All of these groups, we believe, fundamentally exist, but what we're saying here is what are the sum of the sellers doing, not just focusing on one specific group or the other. And still, when we look back from 2016 here, the sum of the sellers are still showing up at lesser and lesser intervals. So what I want to do is just get rid of those arrows just to clarify this chart here for a moment again. I want to focus on 2 periods just to show you what the potential is here for silver over the intermediate term, and then over the long term, 5 years or greater out, 5 to 10 years, depending on how things work out here. We can be talking about when silver is going to break above this all-time high, and we can focus on different time periods appropriately. So looking at the short run, I want to focus on the little mini crash during the coronavirus and then the recovery since the coronavirus. And I want to show you how different segments of the silver market have performed during this time. And so I'm showing it on the big picture here so that you remember we're really talking about quite an insignificant period. We're talking about just the last 6 months here or so within a relatively tame final downtrend when you consider the big picture, right? So let's take a look at this. Let's zoom this in on different segments, the red and the green here. And let's look. So what happened to silver during the coronavirus panic is that silver fell by 34% from that peak in late February, which was right up there, through the bottom on March 23rd. Silver fell by 34%. When we look at the senior silver miners, and we're talking about the SIL ETF here, these are the top largest 20 senior miners in the world. These ones fell by 35%. So only a slight deterioration here in the senior silver miners, which was interesting to see. A lot of the senior miners, just for reference, they harvest a lot of non-silver ore. A lot of the companies that call themselves silver miners are actually base metal miners primarily. They mine for zinc and lead and copper, and they only derive somewhere around 30 or 40% of their actual revenue from silver. So you want to be a little bit careful when you're choosing your senior silver miners. And then I'm bringing up here a junior silver miner. We've covered Impact Silver before. We talked about them last fall. Impact Silver, just for reference, is a company that I still own shares in. And it is a company that I believe will rise very strongly, especially when you look at the recovery here. We'll switch to that in a moment. But I just want to show you what happened to Impact Silver during the 34% decline is that Impact Silver, being a junior silver producer, fell even more than the price of silver. So there's no free lunch when you're looking for leverage because leverage can work on the way down as well. Now, let me switch over to look at the recovery here that has just happened and look at these same three asset classes. So notice from that March low, as silver bullion here has risen by 46% out of the low, the senior silver miners have risen by 55%, and Impact Silver has risen by 125%. So there is extreme leverage to be found here from, not quite so extreme leverage in the senior silver miners. But I mean, this is almost a tripling here in the price of silver over just the last 3 months is what we're talking about, just this little green shaded area. And if you're new to studying this dynamic, I just want to encourage you to understand where I come from as an independent analyst in the precious metals. I think there is merit to owning a core position in the physical bullion, absolutely. And then once you've established your core position, depending on your risk tolerance, I strongly believe that there is a case to be made for owning some of the very leveraged silver equities, such as Impact Silver. And if you consider this, so what are the benefits of the different ones? Well, the physical metal can never go bankrupt, whereas if the price of the metal, let's say fell back down to $10 or $11 per ounce and stayed there for a couple of years, some of these silver miners might end up going bankrupt. Whereas if the price of silver, let's say, triples from here and gets back to 50, consider that Impact Silver rose 125% just in that little green box here. So imagine what would happen if the price of silver got back to 50. I mean, this company is going to go probably 500 or 1,000% higher during that period of time. So I just want to show you the metrics here that we're looking at to talk about risk versus reward. And once again, just to restate my disclaimer, I own shares in Impact. They're not paying me to say this. They're not paying me anything at all. I don't take any fees from these companies. All I do is I talk about the companies that I own and the investments that I am making and that we are making here with firm capital as well. Now, the one thing that I think we all need to keep in mind at this point in the game, we're trying to evaluate, is silver going to break out here? The thing that we need to keep in mind is how silver has been performing relative to the U.S. stock market. And there's a lot of people who are interested in the precious metals who are doing so from a standpoint of saying, I think the stock market is going to crash or decline significantly over the years ahead, and therefore I want to protect myself with the precious metals. And you have to be really careful for that type of analysis at certain junctures. For example, look at what has happened recently during the coronavirus crash and recovery. Look at the relationship between silver and the S&P 500, the US stock market. Notice how tightly these things were correlated. Okay, I don't even need to say it. You can see it right here. And so notice that as stocks were crashing, silver was crashing more or less at the same time, and the recoveries have happened at more or less of the same pace. And you could say, well, silver is now beginning to outperform stocks. Yes, that's good. We can see that. But just look back in history, late 2019, right around the turn of the year, notice how silver was outperforming stocks there. Silver made a new high even as stocks were beginning of their rollover into the first wave of the crash. Silver made a new high. But then what happened? That high turned out to be a false rally, and it totally crashed with stocks after that. So we're seeing another one of these periods of outperformance. Can we trust the outperformance now if one thinks that stocks are going to decline significantly again over the next 6 to 18 months? Can one trust the outperformance of silver right here and right now? I'm asking you to look at the data and give me an answer to that. And if you're saying, well, it's just this one, it was just this one crash for the coronavirus, let's go back to the crash of 2008 and look at what tends to happen here and the severity of these crashes. This is from the stock market former all-time high in October of 2007. So I'm looking from the high. And notice here how silver, even as stocks were already down almost 20% here into the beginning of 2008, and this looks relatively tame, but remember, this is when Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns were all going bankrupt, and Merrill Lynch and Wachovia, and the Fed announced TARP and TALF. This is when things were really getting crazy into March of 2008. Notice how silver outperformed during that initial part of the decline in the stocks. And so a lot of people were looking at this saying, look, see, silver is performing as a safe haven asset. And again, going into late 2008, but then noticed what happened in the severity of the crash. Basically, as a net sum, all of those gains were wiped out. Okay, so there was a 7% difference here, but for practically speaking purposes, these two asset classes bottomed with similar percentage declines into the worst of the crash. And then, of course, what happens after the worst of the crash is silver tends to rise first after that. But what we're talking about here is what actually happens during the crash. And you better believe a lot of the silver miners fell a lot more than 32%. A lot of these silver miners fell by 70 or 80 or 90%, even more than the stock market. So what I'm trying to show here is silver has this history of outperforming during the initial part of declines and then basically giving up the ghost. I'm just showing what the data is illustrating to us here. Okay, this has nothing to do with what I think should happen. I think both gold and silver should serve as cornerstones for monetary systems around the world. That's what I think should happen, personally speaking. But what we're looking at here with the data is, who cares what I think? What actually happens in the real world when we look at all these examples throughout history? So I want to bring up the main silver chart once again and just call to your attention how clear it is what is happening now. And I just need to highlight the make or break attempt that silver is trying to have right now from this primary blue color downtrend, which should be the final downtrend of the bear market. The question is, if stocks roll over again, which a lot of you out there I know are anticipating, and we just looked at the evidence between stocks and the silver price, is silver going to roll over again back down to its recent lows if stocks crash again? So what I want to do is, let's say, okay, whether or not that happens, whether or not silver makes one more final low or whether it's getting ready to break out now, I want to show you what happened the last time that silver broke out of a trend like this. This was a different pattern. This was a wedge. You can see here in the turquoise color, a wedge downtrend versus a channel downtrend. Still, there's similar principles that apply. So let's zoom this in and look at that. And there's that terminal wedge we were talking about. And there was the breakout from the terminal wedge right there in February of 2016, which, by the way, is when we launched our premium subscription service. I launched it in February of 2016, and this was one of the major data points that I was looking at, because I was looking at what was a bottoming pattern here for the previous 3 years, which finally gave a signal showing that this former downtrend was about to change direction. And so we saw the breakout here in the beginning of February 2016. But notice this very quickly. We're looking at weekly bars here for the spot price of silver. Notice that after that breakout here in the beginning of February, there was what? Only 8 weeks. There was this little 8-week consolidation. And I just remember this so clearly. A lot of people didn't believe that this was going to break out, because if you look at the nominal prices, we were still below where we were at the end of 2015. A lot of people were saying, this is nothing. We were studying this terminal wedge pattern and saying, look, it's broken the terminal wedge. And then you had only 8 weeks to prepare yourself, basically till the very beginning of April. You had 8 weeks. And then we had this surge here, the surge from 15 up to 21, 25. And the thing is, a lot of the silver miner companies from this point to this point rose 100, 200, 300, 500%. But you only had 8 weeks to prepare for that after we saw that downtrend break there. Let's bring it back to the present, and let's just imagine, whether it's now or whether it's 1 or 2 years from now, whenever this breakout happens, I strongly suspect that there's going to be a similar window of approximately 8 weeks to prepare when we see this breakout. There's going to be the initial breakout, a slight back off, and a lot of people are not going to believe it again at the time. And then we are going to have that first impulsive move up to the major resistance level at 26. So just keep in mind, if think back to that chart of the silver price and Impact Silver, for example, and keep in mind, so this company rose 125% from there to there. Imagine what's going to happen from 18 or 19 up to 26. Imagine what's going to happen from 26 back up to 50 for a lot of these different silver miners. And so if we see this breakout here, I'm telling you to watch this downtrend line very, very closely over the weeks ahead. If we see this breakout, I propose to you that you're going to have a window of approximately 1 to 3 months to really top off your silver bullion and silver mining purchases before this thing takes off. And I'm going to switch my message here and be saying to people, look, you've missed the move. So does this happen now? Is this a little bit later to come after the stock market brings things down again later this year? We don't have the final answers to those questions, but we are going to be studying the data here very, very closely over the months ahead to make sure we get this thing right. I do want to wish you a very happy 4th of July if you are in the United States. A belated Happy Canada to you. Happy Canada Day to you if you're in Canada, which was on the 1st of July. I hope you're enjoying your summer if you're elsewhere in the Northern Hemisphere. And if you're some of our subscribers down south in Australia and New Zealand, I hope the winter season is being restful for you. But anyway, back to the United States. Enjoy your 4th of July. It'll be a long weekend here in the U.S., so enjoy some time off away from the markets. But think about what I just said. If we see this little pop above that downtrend line in silver now, I'm telling you, there is a short window ahead to finalize where you want to be before that next surge happens. I do want to tell you about the services that we offer here. We offer a service which is like what you're seeing now, except much more in depth. We do approximately hour-long videos every week where we cover not only silver, but gold, the US dollar, the US stock market, other commodities, the gold and silver mining sector, as well as the exact miners that we are investing in here. I told you one of the ones that I still own shares in. We own some shares from a private placement that we did last year in Impact Silver. You get flash updates directly to your inbox about everything that we are thinking and doing here, all in this one service. So absolutely critical if you are a precious metals investor to be following what is happening around the world in a clear way each and every week. If you would like to speak one-on-one about your situation, I definitely understand that, and I want to let you know that I am available to work with you by consultation. As I said earlier, I take no fees from any of the companies that I'm discussing here, nor any of the dealerships that we discuss. I simply look out for the best interests of individuals from an independent analyst standpoint, and we do all sorts of strategic planning related to your situation in the precious metals markets. I want to thank the people who are supporting this channel on Patreon. It means a lot to me. You guys know who you are. Your support on that really means very much. And always remember, if you are supporting this channel on Patreon, you get first dibs on requesting topics for new videos. So you can always send me a request on Patreon, and I do my best to work in topics in these videos over the weeks ahead. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you'll get notified when these free videos come out. As I said, pay attention to that downtrend in silver. You don't want to miss that when that happens. The problem that we had when we first started this service in 2015, and then the premium service went live in 2016, is that a lot of people missed that surge in early 2016, and then they were left chasing it in June and July of 2016, and then the market reversed on them after that. So I want to encourage you to really follow it closely now so that you don't fall into that category again in the future. Happy 4th, happy weekend to you. Stay safe and stay healthy.